Do you watch TV shows? No. Maybe that would help. Yeah. But you have beautiful English, so I don't know that you need any help. But that might help with thinking about, you know, even if you don't speak it, you hear it spoken.
Make sure you get in front of you.
Yeah.
Tongue down. Tongue high. Yes.
Luca. See? Luca? Luca?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Okay. Gracias.
Hola, ¿me escuchan? Estamos próximos a partir, estamos a la espera de la llegada de nuestro rector, así es que llegando nuestro rector vamos a comenzar, así que lo van a ver aparecer por esa puerta. Así que ya estamos prontos a iniciar. Vamos a hacer algunas pruebas de audio porque nos están escuchando en las 4 sedes, las personas que están también vía streaming conectados. Estas son pruebas de sonido para ver que todos nos estén escuchando sin problemas. Perfecto, nos están mencionando que todos nos escuchan, así que estamos a pocos minutos de iniciar. Que luego vamos a partir nuestro simposio tan esperado el día de hoy. Bien, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Vamos a dar inicio a nuestro simposio, ¿sí? Bueno, bienvenidos a todos a nuestro simposio, estimado rector, vicerrectores, directores académicos, decanos, directores, docentes, educadores de simulación, estudiantes presentes en este simposio y nuestros queridos amigos de distintas universidades y campos clínicos que también están el día de hoy presentes, a nuestro simposio de simulación interprofesional Optimizando la atención a través del aprendizaje colaborativo. Este simposio se enmarca en el proyecto FDI Mineduc que fue adjudicado a fines del año 2022 llamado Desarrollo de competencias interprofesionales en estudiantes de pregrado de las carreras de la salud, basado en un formato híbrido de simulación con foco en la identidad de género, la inclusión y la no discriminación. Quiero contarles que a lo largo de este tiempo hemos venido desarrollando distintas actividades en donde los hemos hecho presentes a todas nuestras sedes y a todos nuestros estudiantes académicos y directivos de nuestra comunidad sebastiana. Comenzamos con la socialización del estado del arte mediante un focus group en donde pudimos reunir a docentes, directivos, estudiantes de las distintas carreras de la salud y de nuestras distintas sedes. Este grupo de trabajo nos permitió compartir conocimientos, experiencias, sentando las bases para el avance de este proyecto, obteniendo importantes resultados de reflexión y análisis frente a este tema. Compartir con ustedes lo que hemos logrado integrar este proyecto en nuestro plan de estudios de las carreras de la salud, un hito sumamente relevante, específicamente porque todas nuestras carreras de la salud compartirán en el octavo semestre esta formación conjunta, como parte del hito evaluativo integrativo basado en simulación interprofesional. Además, durante las jornadas de socialización que se realizaron en el mes de enero, pudimos compartir matrices de coincidencia y empezar ya a desarrollar diseños de escenarios interprofesionales para poder compartir las competencias IPEC a través de estos casos clínicos y estas matrices que nos llevó a compartir nuestras experiencias y de qué manera poder abordar los distintos casos que estamos desarrollando. Este esfuerzo fue fundamental para el desarrollo de la creación de un comité académico, el cual se encuentra trabajando actualmente en la creación de estos diseños y nos va a permitir generar prontamente nuestros diseños instruccionales con foco en la no discriminación y la igualdad de género. Hemos socializado este modelo de educación interprofesional que se ha diseñado junto con todas las herramientas instruccionales que corresponden a las competencias interprofesionales y la innovación que con ello conlleva. Estos avances nos permiten continuar fortaleciendo nuestro enfoque en la educación interprofesional y la simulación clínica, asegurando una formación integral y de alta calidad a nuestros estudiantes. Próximamente iniciaremos el programa de desarrollo docente en educación interprofesional con simulación clínica, con foco en la identidad de género, la inclusión y la no discriminación, que capacitará de forma permanente a nuestros académicos, docentes y educadores en simulación. Con este esfuerzo vamos a garantizar que todos nuestros académicos estén siempre al día con las mejores prácticas y metodologías en este campo. Hoy estamos aquí reunidos en este simposio para continuar con este trabajo colaborativo y poder compartir nuestros avances y aprendizajes y seguir impulsando la educación interprofesional en salud. Este encuentro es una oportunidad para fortalecer nuestras redes y estrategias y para seguir mejorando la calidad de la atención a través del aprendizaje colaborativo. Les agradezco a todos, a todas, por estar presentes el día de hoy, a nuestras universidades amigas, a nuestros queridos campos clínicos que acompañan a nuestros estudiantes el día a día, a nuestros directivos, directores, decanos que están el día de hoy presentes, porque estamos seguros, este equipo está muy seguro que juntos vamos a poder alcanzar grandes logros y poder avanzar en este importante hito que está desarrollando la primera universidad chilena en incorporar la simulación interprofesional en su currículum. Así es que a todos muy bienvenidos. Y para dar inicio de manera formal a nuestro evento, tengo el honor de presentar a nuestras invitadas que están el día de hoy, Rini Broughton y Krista Anderson, quienes nos van a acompañar hoy día con muy importantes presentaciones. Y antes quiero invitar, muchas gracias, querido rector, por estar acá, a nuestro rector Hugo Lavados, quien se va a dirigir a ustedes a darnos unas palabras.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say hello to our distinguished professors that are joining us during this event. I was wondering about the weather in Minnesota right now. It's hot because they have two possibilities, very cold or very hot. It's, perhaps only Michigan is worse than well, I've been a couple of times there, and people is very, very warm, actually. Muy bienvenidos todos quienes están asistiendo a este simposio. Es importante para nosotros, por cierto, por un par de razones que quiero señalar. Ahora, cuando estaba preparando las palabras que iba a dirigir, me preguntaba en realidad que es como vender arena en el desierto del Sahara, porque vamos a hablar sobre la importancia de la simulación en quienes ya están convencidos de la importancia de la simulación. Pero en fin, para la universidad, el tema de simulación clínica es muy importante. Hoy día tenemos ya lo que denominamos hospitales, 4 hospitales de simulación en nuestras sedes en que impartimos carreras del área de la salud. Santiago, Concepción, Valdivia y la sede de Puerto Montt, que llamamos sede de la Patagonia. Es muy importante porque el 60% de los 40.000 estudiantes de pregrado de la universidad están matriculados en carreras del área de la salud. es, por lo tanto, un volumen muy importante, con una gran mayoría de mujeres, por las características que tiene. No puede discutir si está bien o no, mal, pero el hecho concreto es que hay carreras que están muy, muy fuertemente sesgadas hacia la matrícula femenina. En los hospitales, en las actividades que hacemos, del orden de 12.000 estudiantes al año están participando, 76 asignaturas anuales hoy día están en actividades formativas en estos hospitales. Y la cifra que me interesó más, me pareció más significativa, es que del orden de 900 académicos se han capacitado en el uso de los hospitales. De hecho, a fines del año pasado teníamos a 100 académicos participando en el diplomado en simulación. Decía que es indispensable, que es como hablar a los conversos, pero en fin, es más bien para reafirmar mis propias convicciones, quizás. Nuestros estudiantes, está claro, quienes estudian hoy día, tienen que insertarse en un mercado laboral crecientemente complejo. Todos sabemos, un lugar común, decir que el escenario, por el cambio tecnológico, el cambio del conocimiento, el cambio demográfico, que también altera la morbilidad, claramente tiene desafíos que son bien complicados. Y especialmente para quienes tenemos responsabilidad de formación de las personas que van a trabajar como profesionales posteriormente en el campo de la salud, porque quizás una de las cosas que estamos seguros es que en 5 años más, cuando los que hoy día ingresaron terminen, 7 o el 9, depende de lo que hagan posteriormente, van a estar trabajando con tecnologías distintas. Por lo tanto, si hay algo que tenemos que hacer en la formación, especialmente en el área de simulación, es ser flexible, es tener la posibilidad de ir introduciendo cambios. Y junto a eso, las dificultades que todos sabemos que objetivamente existen en forma creciente en nuestro país, que ya están presentes en los países más desarrollados, para que los estudiantes estén en contacto directo con pacientes, hacen que la simulación ya no sea solo un tema tecnológico, que sea una cuestión obligatoria. O sea, no hay muchas más posibilidades de desarrollar una formación de calidad, en profundidad y con los marcos teóricos y prácticos necesarios, si no existe la posibilidad de trato directo con pacientes, a menos que existan y con cada vez más tecnología, equipos de simulación. Nuestra infraestructura, como es lógico, se adapta a nuestro modelo educativo, por lo tanto, lo que se está haciendo bajo la dirección de Andrés es desde etapas tempranas que los estudiantes estén, en el fondo, practicando, estén haciendo lo que puede parecer una contradicción en los términos, un oxímoron, de practicando a través de la simulación. Es interesante, el mundo real simulado. Es como el otro día inauguramos unas salas de ejercitación para la Facultad de Derecho, que era hecho a través de realidad virtual, que era idéntico a una sala de la Corte Suprema, una sala de la Corte de Apelaciones, una sala de un tribunal de familia. Ahora, lo interesante, en mi opinión, es que la tecnología se basaba en tecnología de juegos, que fue desarrollada para lo que los niños, veo a mis nietos jugando en todo tipo de competencias. Esa tecnología fue la base para desarrollar estas aulas virtuales que, como no pueden, sobre todo estudiantes que vienen en la tarde a la universidad, jornada vespertina, no pueden ir a los tribunales. Bueno, están yendo a los tribunales, pero en forma simulada. Ahí Andrés nos va a entregar seguramente un marco teórico para eso. Espero introducirlo en otras carreras, Andrés. No quiero darle a conocer, a mí me interesó que lo que hacen nuestros hospitales, que tienen incluso recepción clínica, tratan de hacer una simulación muy buena. Incluso hay alguna recepcionista mal genio, supongo, Andrés, ¿no es cierto? También, para que sea más realista el asunto. Quiero solamente reiterar, no darle una lata, que hemos estado haciendo inversiones significativas. Recientemente tenemos la posibilidad de decir que la universidad adquirió un simulador de radioterapia que va a fortalecer la formación de estudiantes en tecnología médica, que le permite tener un primer acercamiento con los aceleradores que están usando marcadores para enfermedades de cáncer. Es una cuestión personal, me llamó la atención, porque uno de mis hijos es médico especialista en medicina nuclear, por eso me pareció muy interesante, quería compartirlo con usted. Sí, también es interesante que somos la primera universidad en Chile en tener este equipamiento y esperamos que genere lo que todos sabemos que es importante, que es un aprendizaje significativo. Por cierto, los equipos no terminan ahí, espero que muchos tengan la posibilidad de trabajar en nuestros hospitales y en el futuro. Pensamos con bastante ambición en elevar el nivel e incluso entrar a trabajar con simulación en niveles más complejos y de especialidades. Muchas gracias nuevamente a nuestras distinguidas visitas, nuestras profesoras. Desgraciadamente, el clima no es el mejor para poder compararlo, por lo menos con Minneapolis, de Twin Cities, ¿no es cierto? Pero, en fin, no hace tanto frío y espero que también que conozcan algo más que simplemente esta sala que tampoco está muy, no está tan a tono con lo que debe ser, pero en fin, trabajamos así. Así que muchas gracias nuevamente y muchas gracias a todos ustedes por estar en este simposio. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, querido rector, por sus palabras y por habernos dado esta introducción a lo que estamos realizando como simulación clínica en este nuevo modelo que ya llevamos un año prácticamente realizándolo. Vamos a invitar a continuación a nuestro director ejecutivo de Campos Clínicos, Sergio Torres, quien se va a dirigir a nosotros en esta oportunidad.
Buenos días, gracias Carolina por la presentación. Traje un pequeño torpeo aquí, para no olvidarme. Bueno, queremos agradecer obviamente la presencia de nuestro rector, Hugo Lavado, que nos acompaña hoy día, autoridades académicas y administrativas de nuestra universidad, a quienes nos acompañan acá presencialmente y quienes están también conectados a través de la tecnología en las diversas sedes de nuestra universidad. Agradecemos también la presencia de invitados especiales. Tenemos, como bien decía Carolina, invitados de diversas universidades amigas que comparten, digamos, estas experiencias también y queremos con ellos también ser parte, digamos, de lo que es estos desarrollos. Tenemos participación también activa de nuestros campos clínicos, del sector público, del sector privado, empresas del rubro de la salud que también nos acompañan y que son aliados estratégicos nuestros, representantes del Ministerio de Salud, y, por supuesto, también docentes y estudiantes de nuestra universidad que también han sido invitados. Quiero expresar, sí, un especial saludo a nuestras invitadas que vienen de la Universidad de St. Catherine, a René y a Krista. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Queremos, obviamente, conocer, digamos, de parte de ustedes todas las buenas prácticas que en vuestra universidad se desarrollan en el ámbito de la simulación clínica y, obviamente, también todo lo que significa la integración y la participación activa de docentes y estudiantes. Bueno, como bien decían en la introducción, estamos en un periodo de desarrollo de este gran proyecto del Fondo de Desarrollo Institucional del Ministerio de Educación, que la universidad participó hacia fines del 2022 y tuvimos la oportunidad y la suerte de, yo diría que no la suerte, ya tuvimos la oportunidad concreta de presentar un muy buen proyecto y que ese proyecto fuera seleccionado y autorizado, digamos, para llevarlo adelante. Es un proyecto que obviamente a la universidad lo viste muy bien, es un proyecto que habla de lo que es la interprofesionalidad, que es precisamente, y en el ámbito de la salud, un aspecto que vemos en el día a día. O sea, nosotros creemos que es fundamental que los estudiantes sepan que no van a trabajar aislados en su profesión, sino que se van a integrar con otros profesionales, con técnicos, con personas que manejan diferentes oficios y por lo tanto es importante y relevante que nosotros los preparemos para enfrentar ese mundo real. Acá no podemos pensar en que cada disciplina es independiente de la otra, acá hay una integración y un trabajo que tiene que hacerse de manera conjunta. Por lo tanto, este proyecto en particular nos pone en la vanguardia de lo que significa, digamos, el desarrollo de este tipo de disciplinas, ¿ya? Importante que tengamos en cuenta que la interprofesionalidad obviamente que trae efectos positivos en la medida en que se haga bien, en la medida en que podamos desarrollar adecuadamente un trabajo integrado entre las diferentes carreras. Esto ayuda a mejorar, digamos, la seguridad y la atención de los pacientes, ayuda a reducir los eventos adversos, ayuda a una mayor integración y colaborativa en los trabajos y por supuesto que en la medida que nuestros estudiantes vayan integrando esos conocimientos y esa forma de actuar van a tener resultados mucho más positivos. Queremos que la oportunidad que nos va a dar el compartir, digamos, con René y con Kristen, durante este día, obviamente que nos va a poner también el conocer, como bien les decía, las buenas prácticas de países desarrollados en esta línea y creemos que, bueno, en ese sentido, la universidad que ellas representan tiene, digamos, un desarrollo importante en esta línea. Si ustedes ingresan a su página y pueden ver ahí todo lo que el desarrollo, digamos, de este trabajo, se van a impresionar de lo que significa, digamos, el trabajo integrado. Así que agradecemos nuevamente su presencia acá y agradecemos especialmente también quien ha estado liderando este trabajo. Quiero destacar, bueno, a todo el equipo de simulación clínica, a todos los docentes que participan allí, pero en particular también a Carolina Sambucetti como directora del proyecto, nuestra directora académica, que ha estado, bueno, en todas, o sea, la Caro además tiene que estar dirigiendo los centros desde el punto de vista académico, obviamente con el liderazgo de Andrés Díaz, que es nuestro director general de simulación, y también a Paula Chávez, que también nos acompaña y que Paula ha estado ahí muy encima de todos estos temas, ella está dedicada exclusivamente a esto, y queremos decirles que el avance que hemos tenido en este año y algo de meses que llevamos es notable y esta actividad, este hito que marca parte de nuestro proyecto es el resultado de ese buen trabajo. Así que queremos felicitar realmente al equipo y a todo el desarrollo que hemos tenido durante este periodo. Así que muchísimas gracias y nuevamente bienvenidas.
Muchas gracias, Sergio, por tus palabras y tu reconocimiento también a todo este trabajo. Bueno, y a continuación vamos a invitar a nuestro director general de la Unidad de Simulación e Innovación en Salud de nuestra universidad, al doctor Andrés Díaz Guío, quien es médico intensivista, fellow en simulación, doctor en Ciencias de la Educación y past president de la Federación Latinoamericana de Simulación.
Gracias, Carolina, por la presentación. Muy buenos días para todos, estimado rector, estimadas autoridades, nuestras distinguidas invitadas. Me tomé el trabajo de hacer describir algo para que no se me olvide, así que voy a leerlo. Estimados y estimadas todos, es un honor para mí darles la bienvenida a este simposio de simulación interprofesional y a nuestra casa de estudios. En especial, quiero extender un cálido saludo a nuestras distinguidas invitadas, René y Krista, dos expertas estadounidenses que han hecho grandes contribuciones en el campo de la simulación clínica interprofesional y la inclusión. Gracias por acompañarnos y compartir su valiosa experiencia con nosotros. Permítame compartirles un poco de mi trayectoria, la que ha moldeado la evolución de mis modelos mentales sobre la simulación interprofesional, que ha sido todo un viaje. Soy médico intensivista, como mencionó Carolina, y he estado involucrado en simulación desde el 2001 y en simulación interprofesional en posgrado desde el 2004 aproximadamente. Al inicio de mi carrera como educador en simulación, creía firmemente que los médicos deberíamos formarnos solo con médicos, las enfermeras con enfermeras, los kinesiólogos con kinesiólogos y así sucesivamente. Mi razonamiento era que cada disciplina tenía saberes individuales específicos que necesitaban ser profundizados de manera independiente. Sin embargo, con el tiempo observando los problemas de comunicación y cohesión dentro de los equipos de salud, especialmente en mi área de cuidados intensivos, me di cuenta de que mi conocimiento como intensivista solo podía ser eficiente si contaba con el apoyo armónico de un equipo. Era evidente que necesitábamos desarrollar equipos de alto rendimiento y para lograrlo era esencial estudiar, entrenar y crecer profesionalmente juntos. Además, debíamos participar en la auditoría de nuestro propio desempeño para mejorar continuamente. Aristóteles dijo, lo que tenemos que aprender, lo aprendemos haciendo. Esta frase resuena profundamente en el contexto de la simulación clínica, a través de la práctica, la experiencia compartida y la reflexión. Nos convertimos en expertos y construimos equipos más fuertes y cohesionados. La educación interprofesional definida por el Marco de Acción sobre Educación Interprofesional y Práctica Colaborativa de la OMS, en 2010 se da cuando dos o más profesionales aprenden sobre, de y con cada uno para permitir una colaboración efectiva y mejorar los resultados de salud. En un sistema de salud cada vez más complejo, los miembros del equipo de atención en salud necesitan colaborar entre sí para lograr objetivos comunes y mejorar la experiencia y los resultados en el paciente. Para ello, deben fortalecer sus propios roles y responsabilidades, el trabajo en equipo, su capacidad de resolver conflictos, la comunicación efectiva y su práctica ética. Leer, viajar y aprender de otros con más experiencia que yo en simulación interprofesional me permitió evolucionar mi perspectiva, incorporar estas prácticas a mi metodología pedagógica y analizar su impacto positivo en la práctica real ha sido una revelación. Hoy en día, hay una mayor conciencia sobre la necesidad de la educación interprofesional en América Latina. He visitado muchas universidades a lo largo del continente y es alentador ver un pensamiento favorable hacia esta dirección. Sin embargo, aún queda un largo camino por recorrer. La tradición heredada nos enseñó a formarnos en nichos individuales, pero los tiempos actuales exigen algo diferente. Exigen equipos de atención activos y reflexivos, capaces de adaptarse a la complejidad del entorno del mundo de la salud. Para que la educación interprofesional tenga un impacto real, no puede depender únicamente de iniciativas aisladas o ideas innovadoras. Debe haber una integración formal en el currículo de las carreras de salud, apoyada por políticas educativas claras. En este sentido, la Universidad San Sebastián ha avanzado significativamente. El proyecto FDI Mineduc, liderado por nuestra directora académica Carolina Zambucetti, es una prueba tangible de ello. Hoy nos reunimos para celebrar y fortalecer esta realidad. Este importante proyecto es una de las piezas clave en nuestro plan de desarrollo y crecimiento en el nuevo modelo de simulación, en nuestro afán de mejorar la formación de nuestros estudiantes de ciencias de la salud. John Dewey dijo, la educación no es la preparación para la vida, la educación es la vida misma. De manera similar, la educación basada en simulación interprofesional no es simplemente preparación para la vida profesional, sino que es la vida misma. Esperamos compartir un tiempo académico de calidad y seguir construyendo juntos el camino hacia una educación interprofesional robusta y eficaz. Bienvenidos todos.
Muy bien, gracias Andrés por tus palabras y claras en poder definir en sí lo que se está trabajando con la educación interprofesional. Bueno, y llegó el momento, ¿sí? Llegó el momento de poder presentar a nuestras invitadas. Ellas vienen desde Estados Unidos, de Minnesota. Está con nosotros directora Krista Anderson, quien es directora de simulación para el Instituto de Simulación y Aprendizaje Interprofesional de la Universidad de San Catherine, y a la doctora Ruby Broughton, decana asociada y profesora de la Escuela de Ciencias de la Salud, además directora de Estudios de Salud Holística. Su dedicación a la educación y su profundo conocimiento de la salud holística enriquecen enormemente nuestra iniciativa en este hermoso proyecto. Bienvenidas y queremos compartir con ustedes todo lo que han trabajado en su universidad, así que dejo a este selecto público que hoy día nos acompaña.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to be here, and I'm humbled by that generous introduction. It is clear that you are doing fantastic work here in interprofessional education, and we have a lot to learn from you. I hope that this presentation and our explanation of the things that we are doing at St. Catherine University will give you something to compare to and some useful information. First, we will learn how to use the clicker. That was a joke. So laugh, or Frederico will be fired. So, mi llamo Renee.
Krista Anderson, pronouns she, her.
Thank you. My pronouns are also she, her. There we go. We'll start by just saying that we have no disclosures, we have no financial interests in anything we're about to share. And we like to begin all of our simulations and presentations with this basic assumption that we believe everyone participating in today's presentation is intelligent, capable, cares about doing their best, and wants to improve. And you'll see how this appears a bit later when we start our simulations. The objectives of today, we hope that by the end of this presentation that you will feel more able to explore how to integrate those interprofessional education competencies, the IPEC competencies that I heard mentioned earlier, how you'll be able to incorporate those into interprofessional simulation, that you'll leave here with a better understanding of how to design interprofessional simulation activities that address diversity, inclusivity, and equity using a lens of cultural humility. And we hope that you will leave here understanding the importance of using healthcare simulation standards of best practice, both in the design of and the facilitation of your simulation activities. Just a brief agenda for today. We've gone over welcome and introductions. I'm going to start with an introduction to our institution and some high-level framework of how we consider interprofessional education at St. Kate's, and also just setting a mutual understanding of some key concepts so that we're all on the same page. And then we'll move into planning an interprofessional simulation. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about actually facilitating the simulation, focusing mostly on the pre-brief before the simulation and the debrief following the simulation. So, though we are 6,000 miles north, your neighbor's just 6,000 miles north, And despite the fact that we are far smaller than you, our institution is quite small, we really feel that we have a lot in common with this institution. When we met Carolina and Paola, we really felt a bond, a strong bond with them, and we really feel like we have a lot to learn from all of you, so we are just honored and thrilled to be here. So St. Catherine University, we are in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is a part of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. As you can see, we are a small institution with just about 3,500 students, though most of those students are in our health science programs, health sciences or nursing. We have undergraduate, associate level degrees, bachelor level, master and doctoral level degrees, so we span the degree level. And we have schools of nursing, health sciences, humanities, arts and sciences, and business. We started as a private Catholic institution. We are a private Catholic institution, but when we were founded, it was an elite institution where, you know, the wealthy white women could go to school. And we have really evolved to become a minority serving institution. Over half of our incoming students are of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and many of them are first generation college degree seeking students. And we're very proud of that. We were founded in 1905 by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, and our Catholic social teaching really guides, to this day, our commitment to inclusivity and justice. And though our mission is to educate women to lead and influence, we do have co-education in graduate programs. Our tagline is to love the dear neighbor without distinction, and that makes me cry when I think of that. That is who we are. Like you, we have been the recipient of a very generous grant. Our grant was a 9-year grant. We are just finishing the 7th year of that. And we were funded through a private foundation, and the funding was to support our healthcare programs in developing capacity, expanding our influence and reach. And we focused the goal of this grant on you can't read it very well here in the center of this circle, but it's to improve societal health and well-being by preparing high-quality providers capable of practicing in emerging health-related environments focused on interprofessional collaboration, cultural fluency, and ecological approaches to health across the lifespan. So the 3 main focus areas of our grant are interprofessional collaboration, ecological approaches to health, and cultural fluency. And we do that, And we do that work through faculty development, as you mentioned, through curriculum development, as you mentioned, and through research and scholarship, as you are doing. So very similar to the work you are doing. Once we established these 3 main focus areas, we realized that it was important to identify the competencies that students would need to attain in order for us to measure whether we are meeting our goals. And so, like you, we pulled together a group of faculty from across the programs to identify those core competencies in each of those 3 areas that we would expect of all students by the time they graduate. Many programs have additional competencies depending upon the level of training, but these competencies are the basic core competencies that we would expect of all students. And in interprofessional collaboration, our competencies really focus on the ability to work effectively with healthcare workers from different backgrounds, to understand the scope of knowledge across a variety of healthcare backgrounds, and to be able to collaborate with other professionals to create beneficial outcomes for patient care. Our student competencies around ecological approaches to health, that's the term we use. You might hear social determinants of health or determinants of health, but those things that impact our health that have nothing to do with our genetics. Most of our health outcomes are related to those things, like our environment. our education level. So we really want our students to have a strong understanding of the relationship between the environment that individuals inhabit and their health. We want them to be able to analyze health within the context of systemic injustice and disparities, and we really want them to feel empowered to think about ways to address those injustices with solutions and interventions to improve health, equality, and equity. And then finally, cultural fluency or cultural humility. We want students to be able to self-reflect and have awareness of their own biases and how those biases impact the way that they interpret situations and how they may treat others and conclusions they may derive. And we want them to be able to demonstrate cultural humility in respecting individuals as they are working with them to treat them. So once we identified our competencies, then it comes to faculty development and curriculum development to make sure that we're helping to move students along the path to attaining those competencies. And so just really briefly, I want to show you one example of a simple exercise that we might do with any learner, faculty, or students to help them think about their own bias. And so for this, I would ask you to I'll just take a few seconds just in the interest of time. You can either jot it down or just in your head, make a list of things that you see in this photo. Like come up with all the words of things that pop into your head when you see this photo. And now I'll have you just think about those words. And again, we would normally give students a few minutes to do this, but again, so you get the idea, we'll move forward and have you then think about those words that you either wrote down or had in your head. And of those words, how many of them were descriptive in nature or neutral in value, objective? Things like, it looks like there were multiple individuals. It looks like they were mostly male, gender. They appeared to be on a subway. How many of the words had some interpretation in them? In other words, a possible explanation of what was happening in the photo. They appeared to be fighting. It looked like they were making a video. And then how many of the words had a judgment component in them or a value in them? Things like, he looks surprised, they look angry, or other things, other terms that you might have thought of that had more of a value. Typically, when you do this exercise the first time, you find that you might have more evaluation and interpretation terms than just pure descriptive terms. In this instance, this photo was taken from the New York Times newspaper, and the description of this photo is that wrestling superfan Tim Rivera leads a troupe of performers that cosplay as their childhood heroes in front of unsuspecting subway riders. So that's what was happening in that photo. And then after we do this exercise, we would have the students do this again and actually in more of a practice. So, look at this photo and now this time, try to come up with as many descriptive terms as you can as you look at this photo, things that are purely objective and descriptive. And then once you've done that, try to think of a couple interpretations, come up with a couple things that you think might be going on in this photo. And then we ask students to deliberately come up with one negative evaluation of what they see here and one positive evaluation of what they see here. And again, in the interest of time, I'll just move forward, but this would be how we might walk students or learners through this type of activity. And in this photo, I don't know if you're familiar with the old sitcom, Three's Company. Does that ring a bell to anybody? This is like a comedy show from many, many years ago. But in the show, there was a character named Mrs. Roper, and she was a bit of a flamboyant, kind of a crazy woman. and she's become a cult figure. And so this is a Mrs. Roper romp, they call it, and it's a party where everybody dresses up like Mrs. Roper. So why does this type of thing matter? An exercise like this really helps people think about the way that we make meaning. And going through this exercise might help us identify how our feelings actually start shaping our impressions of a given situation. And doing the second exercise is a nice way to practice seeing things from multiple perspectives, which can be really helpful in moving forward and thinking. And for instance, if you're in a situation, instead of saying like, well, why is everybody so rude? Perhaps you can reframe it and say, note what a behavior, make an objective comment about the behavior, and then come at it from a place of curiosity of, I wonder why it seems that way. As you do any of this work, it is really important to have a theoretical framework to kind of guide your development of curriculum or activities. This is one example of a framework around cultural humility by Ferranda. My colleague, Dr. Krista Anderson, recently completed her doctorate in nursing practice, and she used this framework for her doctoral work. And so I'm going to have her come up and just give a brief overview of Ferranda's framework for us.
But don't go very far. This is not going to take very long. So the theory of cultural humility has a rainbow model, and it's really a model to provide a visual representation of how we can practice cultural humility in our interactions. And so this can be found, I will share the references are there at the end of the presentation. But each ray of the rainbow provides a context that influences how we communicate, from a worldview, from historical precedents, to our political climate, our personal beliefs and values, our situation, our environment. And then the triangle represents how conflict can occur, how that cultural conflict can occur, thinking about one's perspective, how we live in a world of power imbalance, and how there can be discordance of our perspectives. And then we have a choice. And so you see here, there is a line, it says cultural humility. We have a choice to be culturally humble, to be open, to be vulnerable, to be other-centered in our communication, to be curious, to self-reflect, to self-critique. And when we approach our interactions with that, we have positive outcomes versus cultural ambivalence or cultural disturbance or destruction, which brings us to the raindrops, or maybe they're more teardrops. So this is a great model to help us think about how do we practice cultural humility in our interactions, and it's a foundation of a lot of our simulation experiences that we'll talk about.
Thank you, Krista. So the takeaways from this are really mindfulness, having our students and ourselves recognize the impact of our own culture on our habits and our default thinking, self-reflection as a practice to really consider how our beliefs and values impact the way we interpret situations and interact with others. And then curiosity, like that is such a beautiful thing, like to remain curious in interpreting events. And you know, at its core, cultural humility is a way of being with each other's as opposed to cultural knowledge. Cultural humility is actually a way of being. Okay, I want to take just a minute to talk about interprofessional education at St. Catherine University, and I'll try to go through this somewhat quickly, but we use the World Health Organization definition of interprofessional education, which was similar to the one that was stated earlier, that when students from two or more professions learn from, about, and with each other to enable effective collaboration. And if we're doing interprofessional education in the training of our students, it will hopefully lead to interprofessional collaborative practice where healthcare providers are doing this in real life. At St. Kate's, we use the IPEC, or Interprofessional Education Collaborative Core Competencies, to guide our work. There are 4 main competencies, and they are around values and ethics, roles and responsibilities, communication, and teamwork. And underneath each of those 4 competencies are multiple sub-competencies. We have taken those sub-competencies and organized them along a framework that is kind of Bloom's taxonomy or Miller's pyramid for clinical competence that looks at students' ability to know something, then show something, and then do something as kind of a continuum. And we've called our framework domains team aware, team experience, and team ready. So we've taken the competencies from IPEC that are a little more low level and organized them into a team aware domain. And these might involve more just understanding of the roles and responsibilities of other providers. And as we move into team experience, students are starting to do more activities, more interaction between students of multiple providers, multiple disciplines, And then finally, team ready would be the competencies that are really high level, collaborative, practice ready type experiences. Once we establish this framework, we were then able to map all of our interprofessional activities against our framework and scaffold those activities so students in the lower levels of training, we would expect them to be competent in some of the team-aware level competencies. And as they move through their training, they would start having team experience activities. And then finally, by the time they graduate, we want all students to be team ready. So that is how we have organized our IPEC competencies and our interprofessional didactic and simulation experiences at St. Kate's. And now I will turn it over to Krista to introduce simulation.
So creating a shared mental model is really important. Renee has summarized how there was a foundation really for interprofessional education at St. Kate's. So I started in 2020, so that's where the 2020 comes in. And my position is supported by the grant as well. And so when I started in simulation at St. Catherine University, it was happening across many programs, but those that had faculty that were really specialized or had expertise in simulation existed in the pre-licensure nursing programs. But all of the other health science programs that we had were doing simulation with variability, with differing understandings of that there are standards of best practice. The healthcare standards of best practice live with the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning. They used to be titled the ANACSL, Healthcare Simulation Standards of Best Practice. And then they sit only in nursing. And these best practices apply across all professions. So I started amongst a pandemic. Does everybody remember that? Yeah. And so there was an opportunity here for us to think about education differently. So we started as well with a committee, a group of individuals coming together, and we focused on the Jeffries National League of Nursing Theoretical Simulation Framework. And in this framework, and I'll just highlight it quickly, you think about the context of where we are, our facilitator, our participant, their lived experiences, their expertise, and for the participant specifically, your level of the learner, their age of the learner, and what program they're in. And you think about how we're going to do education and how all of this influences each other. And then you design your simulation based on that information, right? And depending on your objectives, what you want to accomplish, what skills are expected. Is there problem solving? What type of student support? And this then informs the outcomes as well as everything else informs the outcomes. And I share this because this is from one program or one course perspective. And we're going to look at this again as we think about it from an interprofessional perspective. So as I said, we needed to create a shared understanding. So we brought together all of those who were interested in simulation, interested in interprofessional education. And we came together and created a committee. We quickly learned that we had a different understanding of what just the word simulation meant. For some programs, simulation meant that you needed to use a mannequin. You needed to use technology. If you didn't use technology, that wasn't simulation. In other programs, for instance, radiography, simulation was testing. You only did sim if you were testing. So we needed to create one shared understanding of what just the word simulation meant and how it could be applied across all of our programs. And then we needed to share the standards of best practice, from the healthcare simulation standards of best practice, and then we have many programs that need to use simulated participants or patient actors, and that there are standards of best practice around this as well. And then there's logistical challenges. Where does the content sit in each of our programs? How do we bring people together? There's limited space. It doesn't work here. It doesn't work there. So by having us all come together, we began to have a more comprehensive conversation. And we were able to identify shared concepts that we need across all of our programs and start to see, oh, this happens in the fall for you, and this happens in the fall for us. Can we come together? And so it was just the low-hanging fruit that we started to work with. And so from simulation at St. Kate's, we have human simulation with the use of simulated participants or embedded actors. So a simulated participant might be the patient, but an embedded actor might be a provider in that role, or it could be a family member in that role. We're generally trying to use simulated participant for any volunteers that actually come into our organization now and play a role. We have technology sim. So this would be our mannequins. It's also our virtual reality types of simulations, our screen-based simulations, augmented reality. And then we have hybrid, which is a mix. It might be a simulated participant or a human with a trainer of an IV arm, because we don't really want to stick our real live humans. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Or it might be a pediatric mannequin with a family member who is our embedded actor. So those would be examples of hybrid. And these slides here are more just to highlight that there are the healthcare simulation standards of best practice. They are open access, free for anybody to look at. And they do focus on your simulation design, your outcomes and objectives, pre-briefing, which does include preparation before the simulation, and the briefing the day of, and then facilitation, which is pretty all-encompassing. That includes pre-briefing, and then the scenario, as well as debriefing. And then there's a standard on the debriefing process, because that is so key to learning. In addition, there is also a best practice on simulation-enhanced interprofessional education. So we'll call that IPE SIM for today. So when you hear that, that's really what I'm referencing, and we're going to dig into this standard. There's also one on evaluation, professional integrity, professional development, and operations. As I said, we use a lot of simulated participants. We have allied therapies like physical therapy, occupational therapy. Working with a mannequin isn't the most realistic in that situation. And so we also shared and introduced the standards of best practice for the Association of Standardized Patient Educators, which really focuses on 5 underlying values of safety, quality, professionalism, accountability, and collaboration. So I am going to recognize the time before I go forward, because this is like the 10:30 break time. And so I'd like to invite everybody for a break, cafe, I believe, in the back. It looks like everything is set up. And then we will reconvene here and we will continue the conversation.
Tenemos 20 minutos para el coffee. En este momento todas las sedes están también en este momento de pausa. Nuestras invitadas van a estar compartiendo con nosotros también el café para que quienes quieran interactuar, y preguntas que vayan apareciendo las van apuntando, porque al final vamos a generar las preguntas para la audiencia.
Are you relaxing?
Buenos días, vamos a empezar ya a acercarnos para dar inicio a nuestra segunda parte de nuestro simposio. La conversación ha estado muy interesante, me imagino, en cada una de las sedes, así es que nos vamos a empezar a acomodar. Los invito a acercarse a sus asientos. Bien, los invito a acercarse, a tomar sus asientos. Vamos a tener oportunidad al final de volver a compartir con todos los presentes. Los invito a acercarse, por favor, para no retrasar la agenda y poder terminar a tiempo. Al final del evento vamos a tomar fotografías todos juntos, así es que vamos a llevar a cabo sellar este momento, ¿no? Bien. Ya todos están tomando sus asientos. Si me pueden dar feedback en las sedes, si estamos ok para dar inicio, si están ya listos para comenzar. Ok. Bien, vamos a continuar entonces con esta segunda parte de nuestro simposio. Al final del simposio vamos a volver a compartir algunas cositas de cafetería, así es que queda tiempo aún. Y aquellos que vayan teniendo preguntas, algunas consultas, los invito a empezar a elaborarlas, porque al final vamos a hacer las preguntas a viva voz a nuestras expertas, ¿sí? Bueno, dejo con ustedes a Krista y Ruini para continuar con la presentación.
Thank you. I welcome everybody back from that wonderful break. It was so good. I love the pineapple juice. All right, so as everybody begins to find their seats, I wanted to share how we brought together simulation and IPE. So we created the Institute of Simulation and Interprofessional Learning, or we call it ISAIL, and it's really to bridge the School of Nursing and Health Sciences. And when I say health sciences, I've learned during the break how there's medicine and pharmacy here, and we don't have medicine and we don't have pharmacy. We have all of the therapies in between, and we have advanced practice providers. So those that work under the supervision of a physician. And so we work to bridge the School of Nursing and the School of Health Sciences to support high-quality simulation and interactive IPE learning activities, really to bring the students through those steps of team awareness, team experience, and that they are ready when they graduate. So as I shared, we brought together a committee of individuals across many different disciplines, and we created a mission and a vision. So our mission is to prepare diverse professionals who lead, influence, and improve health outcomes through simulation-based education and interprofessional learning experiences with the vision to transform the future of healthcare. I wanted to share a little bit of how we've done some of this. Because we have so many programs, I think it's 28 in total that are working together collaboratively, we needed to create a site. So we created an intranet site, and we needed to have a process of who do you contact if you're interested. Whether you're a student or you're a faculty, you're interested in doing an interprofessional learning activity or a simulation for a course, who would you contact? Because we didn't want to keep it to just those in the committee. We wanted to open it up to others. That's the way to kind of get that engagement. And then we created some standard operating procedures, policies and procedures to help guide our work that will work for all the different programs, and templates. We wanted to ensure that the scenario design template that we used was the same, so that it doesn't matter who's facilitating, we're reading it the same way in a table form, similar concepts, that we're building our scenarios using best practices, and that we have a process to schedule in the space and think about how we can get creative so that we have the right learning activities or simulations happening in the right spaces. Because we have spaces from a clinic environment to an acute care hospital environment, to a home environment, because healthcare doesn't only happen in a hospital, it happens across our life. So we have spaces to represent the different environments. And then we really wanted to ensure that faculty and student had preparation materials. So we have orientation videos, on this site. We have our confidentiality, consent, and other forms. We also have a simulation registration process. When we started, simulation might be happening in one course or one program, and so that they could speak about simulation for a small group of students. But now that we're collecting the information across, or the data from all of the programs that are doing simulation and interprofessional simulation, we can tell the story. So we have a story and found the data of evidence to share with the university about the importance of the work that we're doing. And so, for instance, instead of saying that we had 20 students who went through a simulation, we can now say that we've had, 3,500 different learning experiences for students, or 3,500 different students have gone through learning experiences through 255 different simulation activities, and that over 50 of those simulation activities were interprofessional. That speaks to the volume, more than 20 students doing 1 or 2 simulations. And then we wanted to share some examples of simulations that we have done at our organization. We're going to share with you videos of a fetal loss simulation. It is an unfolding simulation with physician assistants who work under the supervision of providers, nursing, social work, and sonography. A cardiac arrest simulation that happens in a radiography lab, in which the PA, nursing, and respiratory care respond to that simulation. Intensive care unit of a transplant patient with physical therapy and nursing. We can do it in a rehab with occupational therapy and nursing. Transitional care discharge with occupational therapy and dietetics and nutrition. We've also done some respiratory distress or respiratory management. Intravenous insertion. We also do some simulations that are outside of the courses. Many of our IPE simulations happen within the courses, but there are some that are occurring outside of the courses now, like mental health. How do we handle anxiety and de-escalation and teach our students how to recognize that in others? Or depression and suicidal ideation. Along with health assessment, we work with our American Sign Language students and nursing to learn how we communicate using interpretive services in the care of a patient. So I'm just going to ask you to take a moment and think about what ideas do you have for IPE Sim? And maybe jot some of those down. At the end of this presentation, there will be a survey, and we would love to have you share those ideas that you have around IPE Sim. So just take a moment and think. What other ideas? What ideas do you have? And I say that because it takes a village. We are getting ready to plan a care conference, interprofessional simulation. Like, that's a wonderful idea. Or maybe it's an ethical dilemma with a patient that requires all those team members to come together. And I think about this because we need to care for people as a team. So we often learn in our silos or our cylinders of excellence, as somebody once told me. But we need to graduate and be ready to take care of people as a team and have a real comprehensive approach to optimize that experience for our community members, our patients. So then, to include social justice, I really want to highlight, as you're including social justice into SIM and into IPE SIM, it's really important to have faculty development and cultural humility. Faculty need to first examine themselves and understand their biases to incorporate this into their inclusive teaching practices. And so we do faculty development, and we're going to show you a video here in the next slide that shares a little bit about what we did in our faculty development, because it's important for us to understand some of the best practices, as well as understand where we exist in our lived experiences, our personal beliefs, maybe our biases, and recognize that and begin to self-reflect. And then your design really needs to be intentional, to be inclusive of diversity, of race, ethnicity, religion, gender, and more. And think about how we build microaggressions and bias into simulations, because we also need to prepare our providers to navigate in a world in which that does exist. So how do we give them coping abilities? And that when you develop a scenario, it's really important that you are providing the resources to the faculty and the students. And we'll talk more about this. But the faculty should have a guide. We can't know everything about everything. We just can't. And so they need resources to help prepare them to facilitate a simulation. But then our students need to be ready to enter into that simulation as well. And so they need preparation material. And then ensure your outcomes embed cultural humility into those standards. So next I'm going to show a video, and this is an example of a sexual orientation and gender identity sim that was used in the faculty development around using cultural humility in simulation and interprofessional sims. And this design of the scenario was intentional to embed scripting to address the impact of trust in the healthcare system, power differentials, priorities of care, and microaggressions that a transgender male might experience. And so the pre-brief included a discussion around best practices of inclusive care, and then the debrief included an opportunity to think about our assumptions, our biases, conflicts, challenges, and what are some strategies that we can use with a patient.
Yeah, I would want David because they know my body, and like I don't want, like, I'm a man and I don't like when, you know, doctors are examining me and making assumptions because of like what my genitals look like. Mm-hmm. So like they advocate for me and it's important that they're there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I will double check on the ultrasound because I think they're going to be doing an abdominal external. Okay. but there is a transvaginal ultrasound option, and I want to just double check on
Make
that.
sure.
Yeah, and make sure
That would be great.
to talk with you about that before you go down for ultrasound. Yeah, but as Sarah said, you know, what is there other things that would be helpful if you do need to have an exam that you can think of?
It's like making sure that like you're telling me exactly what you're going to be doing before you do it.
Sure.
And like I don't like anything being referred to as like female parts.
Okay.
Like if you're talking about like my vagina, just say vagina or like.
Okay. Use the actual
Yeah,
term for it.
like
Okay.
and be like gender neutral when you're referring to like my body.
Okay.
That stuff can be really triggering.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful. We want to make sure that you feel as comfortable as you can. Certainly. Do you have any questions or anything to add? I want to make sure you feel included.
Oh no, I'm good. I just
Okay.
want them to have the best care possible.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we really felt it was important for our faculty to participate as the learner in simulations, because setting up a simulation, our students are already quite nervous about entering into that vulnerable space. And so it's important to help our faculty feel what that might be like, and then also take that time to explore and find their own words so that when they're teaching students, they feel more prepared. Save the questions and comments to the end. So we're going to move into using standards of best practice to plan an interprofessional simulation, because going into the planning is really an important first step. We can't show up the day of and think it's all going to just come together. And so there is a standard of best practice around simulation design, and just really knowing that it's important that it's designed with content experts in consultation from those subject matter experts and simulationists. That is a very important aspect, that we are inclusive of the voices. When we're planning and designing a scenario, it's not as if your respiratory therapy, for instance, is just going to come in that day and fill a spot. They have an intentional reason to be in that simulation. And so there is that intentionality, and their voice needs to be included. We need to ensure that we're building objectives to guide our simulation. And so the objectives, as I will talk about, need to be inclusive of not only the health professional group, but also for interprofessional interactions. Those objectives also need to be at the level of the learner. We need to ensure those objectives align with the modality for the simulation, and that we're designing the scenario and choosing the right fidelity as well. In addition, as we're thinking about the overall design, we need to ensure that it's learner-centered and driven by those objectives and that experience, and to reach those expected outcomes. And that we're planning our pre-brief, and we're going to talk a lot about that pre-brief because that's important for that successful interaction in an IPE sim, and that we're also thinking about what that debrief process will be, and as well as developing a plan for evaluating the experience and then piloting. As you're designing any scenario, IPE or not, it's really important that we do a dry run or pilot that experience. So here's that theoretical framework again. I shared with you the Jeffries and NLN simulation theory. So that was for one program. Now if we look at it from an interprofessional lens, we've got to take the framework or the thoughts and perspectives, the ideas from all of the different professionals that are going to be participating in that scenario, adding to the complexity of the design. So for Sim IPE, we need to create a plan. We're going to walk through the Sim Enhanced IPE standards of best practice and give you a few tips as you're planning a scenario. So we realize that your scenario might already be developed. So this is the work that comes into preparing for the day of. So when I say planning. So first of all, we need to ensure that it is conducted with a theoretical framework, mapping to those IPEC competencies. It's really important to see where those competencies fit into that simulation. We might consider team steps, adult learning theory, or social complexity theory as we're preparing for that scenario. We want to make sure that we're utilizing those best practices in simulation design. As I said, we need to have a planned interactions between the health professionals. So we don't really want one health professional in and they leave, and then the next person goes in and they leave. That's not interprofessional. We have a professional group that maybe starts, maybe it's nursing who starts in the room, and then respiratory therapy enters, or physical therapy enters, and they enter, and there's a handoff or exchange of information that happens to optimize the care for that patient. And then nursing may leave, but there has to be a reason why we are bringing these students together. And the faculty need to understand that as we plan for that day. We need to have some shared goals, and we need to identify, as I said before, interprofessional objectives. Why are we coming together? Is it for effective handoffs? Is it for team communication? Is it to consult and share ideas and concerns about the patient? And then we also need to have shared objectives. So for instance, I said we've done some simulations around respiratory distress or management. If it's not within your program to, like maybe sonography, maybe they don't need to really meet an objective around respiratory management, then they shouldn't be included. But maybe physical therapy or respiratory therapy, nursing, physician assistants, we could involve those that meets a curriculum objective. And then we want to ensure that we have a team-based approach to our pre-brief and our debrief. So as we've said before, it's really important to have that formal education. So thank you all for being here. This is part of that formal education, but it's important to have some understanding of what those best practices are in simulation as well as Sim-IPE, and that it's important for that pre-brief and debrief being facilitated and led by those that have had that education. And then we need to devise an appropriate evaluation plan. And that evaluation plan is thinking about the learner. What was it from the learner's experience? Did they meet the outcomes? But then also they can provide feedback on how well we met those outcomes from their perspective. How well did they feel prepared? And then as well, we need to ensure that we have evaluations from the faculty standpoint and then the program. And as you think about this from a larger context, you're hiring entities. Do they feel that the students are prepared when they leave to work in that team? Are they seeing a reduction of errors that might happen from lack of communication across team members? As I said before, it all comes down to your outcomes and objectives. So this is the standard on outcomes and objectives. Really, that is the groundwork. I'm not going to read through this, but that is the groundwork and the foundation for the designing and the planning of your simulation scenario, is to ensure that you are meeting those objectives and outcomes and that they're facilitated and appropriately leveled. As we dig in deeper to this, as you think about the objectives that you're creating for an IPE sim, you need both the discipline specific, but you also, as a team, need to collaboratively determine what are the best IPE objectives, which ones from the IPEC competencies, and to help map that. We need to have that shared understanding, and then ensuring that they're mapped and aligned with aligned to those IPEC competencies, and then with team steps. As I shared before, it's really important that we have some faculty guides. And these faculty guides can include prompts and examples. Has anybody ever done a simulation and there's silence in the discussion, in the pre-brief, because maybe they just don't know, they haven't had enough experience? So we need to as facilitators, plant some seeds, share some ideas. And as a faculty member, once again, I'm not going to know it from all different perspectives. And so having some prompts is really helpful to help me prepare so that I feel more confident and comfortable entering into that space. I need to have that shared understanding of those objectives, that there's relevancy for my student group to be there participating. So it's important that I have my role. And then in addition, that I understand what my role is going to be that day. And that moves into facilitation, because there is a healthcare standards of best practice on facilitation. And once again, I'm not going to read through it, but just walk through highlights in the next few slides. So the facilitative approach should be leveled to the learning. Now this might be for learners of similar levels. So we might have all junior level students working together. But let me just ask you, can we have a mix of levels of students? Could you have a senior level student working with a junior level student? I'm looking into the audience, and I know that we have individuals online as well, but I see some head nods of no, and I see some head nods of yes. And I think what's really important is if you do bring students together from different levels across different programs, that you also have a plan in how you're facilitating that simulation to help give them resources so they can help move through the sim. And so that might be that you have a junior level nurse with a senior level nurse working with physical therapy. That senior level nurse could be the charge nurse, and the junior level nurse could be participating as the nurse at the bedside. So that might be a way that you can mix levels as well. Because if you really think about healthcare, there are power differentials or different levels within our care. And so it is important for us to work together from different levels. We just need to ensure that we have the proper cues or resources to help move the students through the simulation. Does that make sense? And then when we're facilitating, we need to really put some energy into that pre-brief. And once again, pre-brief is preparation before. There's an echo for me, so I don't know if I should stand back. So thinking about that preparation, there is preparation at the discipline-specific level. So if I am a physician, there's the preparation material for the physician, but nursing's preparation material might be slightly different to meet the objectives. So there is discipline-specific preparation, but there is also interprofessional preparation that might be a little bit more shared across. So you really want to make sure that your preparation material is ready, is at the appropriate level, but then as a faculty team facilitating, all faculty should have a shared understanding of what everybody's preparation material was. So while it might sit in your course or with your program, at the higher level, all the faculty should be aware of what the other programs are doing in preparation for that simulation. In addition, once again, I'm going to have faculty guide. I learned a lot in my DMP project on how important it is to have those resources and have an appropriately scripted and cued scenario with prompts and examples in both the pre-brief and the debrief. And there needs to be even a little bit more attention placed in that preparation phase and in the pre-briefing if we are going to include social justice concepts. So I just want to highlight that. and that students also need to be ready to come into the conversation. They need to understand why we're coming together. Why are we doing an interprofessional sim? Why do I need to work with respiratory therapy? I just page them. They come in. No, that's not really what happens. What happens is we collaboratively work together to team to take care of that patient. And then in the planning, it's important to have that dry run. It is very important for all of us to review the agenda, understand what our roles are. I'm not quite sure how simulation is facilitated across your simulation hospitals, but I do know it's not one person that makes a simulation successful. It is a team. It is a team of people. So who is going to lead the pre-brief? Who is going to run the simulator? Who is going to help cue? Who's going to help move students to and from different spaces? Who's going to facilitate the small group pre-brief exercises that we might do? We need to understand those roles. Who's going to lead the debrief? We can't all talk at once. So what is that going to look like? And that it's really important that when you're looking at the whole plan, that we're ensuring that all the voices, all those health perspectives are being included in the pre-brief and the debrief as well as that scenario. Because sometimes, and I've written a lot of papers recently, you overlook things. And so it's really important to get that second, third, fourth set of eyes on the plan. When you're doing the dry run, you're also going to be thinking about what's your pre-brief. We're going to talk more about that, but it's important to review this in that planning, in that dry run. And as I said before, really also creating that shared understanding of how we're going to address diversity, equity, inclusivity, social drivers of health or ecological approaches, power differentials. All of that is very important. And as I said with the debrief, as we're thinking about that planning, I often think about an IPE debrief is co-debriefing. It is not one person facilitating. So if you're in your discipline-specific sims, it might be you're the subject matter experts. You can facilitate that debrief alone. But when we are debriefing as a team, we need to ensure that we know who's going to maybe be that lead debriefer, and then how am I going to pass it off to my subject matter experts? And which of our subject matter experts are going to address different topics within that debrief? And how are we going to facilitate this in a very collaborative manner? We want to involve all voices. So we also have to think about our learners. We have learners who are the participants in the sim, but also those who are observing. So the observers should also be included in that debrief, but maybe have active roles of watching for certain aspects during a sim. And once again, we need to ensure that we're involving all the faculty. We're going to highlight, show you a video. So it's about 4 minutes, but take a moment. It's not about simulation per se, but I'll share with you why, or even have you think about why we want it.
Today we're going to play a game specifically designed to test your spatial awareness. Meet the Brain Games Double Dutch team. Now, what does jumping rope have to do with the brain? Well, Double Dutch requires off-the-chart spatial awareness. Today, these kids are going to help us test yours. For this game, all you have to do is keep track of the number of times that either of the girls in green jumps. You'll count each time one of them lands a jump, like this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As you can see, these jumpers are pretty quick on their feet, so you're going to have to pay attention to keep up. When the whistle blows, start counting. Ready? Go. So, how many jumps did the green team make? Did you say 38? If so, you agreed with 40% of our test audience. Now, some of you may be onto us, but for those of you who aren't, did you happen to notice anything else going on during the double dutch? Maybe a giant chicken strolling right through the middle of the set and doing a funky chicken dance? Now, some of you may have missed that funky chicken, but many of you probably saw it. And that's okay, because the chicken was just there to distract you too. Here's the real question. What color was the wall behind the double dutch game? Here's a hint. It wasn't the same color at the end as it was when they started jumping. The back wall was changing color the entire time, from bright blue to bright red. Nearly everyone misses it. But why? It turns out there's far too much information coming in through the eyes at any given moment for the brain to fully process all of it. As a result, the brain has to act like a spotlight, focusing our attention on some parts of the scene but not others. Now, most of you were probably paying attention to the jumpers, and some of you may have suspected that something strange was going to happen, and so you saw the chicken. But you probably weren't paying attention to the back wall. And what we don't pay attention to, we don't see. And hey, for those of you who managed to catch everything so far, did you notice that we also swapped the rope turners out halfway through? Gotcha.
Thank you for indulging and watching in that video, but you can see how our mind can only take snapshots of information at any given point. So as you're planning a simulation, especially an interprofessional simulation, I showed you that video because we often come with our perspective, and as facilitators who are viewing from a debrief, we might only be looking to see at what are our students doing and are they meeting their objectives versus taking that step back and looking at how is the team, how are the interactions of the team, is it effective, how is the communication? So it's important that we have learners in the sim who are watching for different aspects, and it's important that our faculty are as well, because we might come with our bias or assumptions or our expectations and we can miss things. So it's important to have both. And so we tend to observe with our own lens. We want to ensure that we bring in different viewpoints. And then, once again, make sure you have an evaluation process, because it's good to collect that data to be able to share your story. So we're going to move into the day of simulation, and Renee is going to take it from here.
All right, thank you, Krista. She's taken us through the simulation planning, and as she said, now we're moving into the day of simulation, and we're really going to spend most of our time on the pre-brief, as she just did in her presentation. The pre-brief is really critical to a well-executed simulation experience for the students, and the debrief, which is also extremely important, and a lot of times that's where the learning really happens. So for the pre-brief, again, following the standards of best practice, it's essential that the simulationists who are working that day are very familiar with the scenario itself, but that they are also trained in how to pre-brief a simulation. And as Krista mentioned, she went through the developing of the simulation experience already, so I won't cover that. And the fact that the knowledge level of the learner is really important when you're entering into this simulation. These are the components of the pre-brief that you would find in the standards of best practice: setting the scene, setting expectations and ground rules for the learners, going over the scenario, orienting students to the room, and then giving students prep time. And I'm going to dig into each of those a little bit more, starting with setting the scene. So it's really important that you start out by just orienting all of the learners to the purpose of the simulation. That seems kind of obvious, but sometimes learners come to an required simulation activity, and they maybe haven't been prepared prior to that, and really aren't aware that the purpose is to do an interprofessional simulation with students from other disciplines. So really just starting at the start and laying that foundation for everybody in the room to understand what the purpose is. If these learners are new to simulation, if they haven't had a simulation experience yet, it might be good to just explain a little bit about what simulation is. Obviously, as learners advance and they're coming into simulation for their 5th, 6th time, you maybe don't need to explain simulation again, but if needed, it's important. Allowing the students to know who's in the room with them, especially in an interprofessional simulation, allowing for introductions, whether it's a show of hands, like who's from nursing, who's from occupational therapy, like just allowing them to raise their hands or putting them in small groups so they can actually introduce each other. It's really important that they just can see who's in the room. And if there's time for some sort of an activity or icebreaker, that can help break the tension and gives an opportunity for the students to know each other. It's during this time that we're really trying to create psychological safety for our learners. We want to create a safe container where they feel supported in their learning, and they know that it is safe for them to fail if they're going to fail. And so we start all simulations with the basic assumption that we started today, that we tell the students that we believe that everyone participating in the simulation activity is intelligent, capable, cares about doing their best, and wants to improve. It's important for them to hear that from their faculty. They don't want to disappoint us, and so it's really important that they hear that from us. It's important also to talk about the fictional contract that we're going to create, that when you're creating a simulation or we're creating simulations, we do our best to make sure that everything is as realistic as possible, but there are times when you can't get to completely realistic, and the learners need to know that we've done our best to make a realistic scenario. We ask them to meet us halfway, and in the places where it's really not that real, like let's all just agree to act as if this is a real situation. We want to establish confidentiality and really stress that what happens in the simulation stays in the simulation. You don't leave this activity and talk to your classmates or anybody else about what somebody else did. You can share your own experience of how you felt, something you did, but really not to talk about each other. And also, we give students a safe word. So if they're really having a difficult time and starting to panic, we give them a word that they can say that tells the simulationist that they need to step out, and provide them an opportunity to step out if they need to. It's really important to address anxiety, and I don't know how it is in your institution, but I have noticed that the level of anxiety in learners has really escalated, especially post-COVID. Like the number of students who are really struggling with anxiety and depression and mental health issues is really there. And so it's kind of a fine balance of not wanting to set people into panic mode, but also trying to help them understand that a little bit of anxiety is actually desirable. It's a good thing, and that's where learning happens. So sometimes I'll share this diagram with students to talk about that phenomenon of anxiety being a good thing. And I show them, at the center of this target, the green zone represents the comfort zone, where you're just completely comfortable. Maybe you're sitting on, imagine you're on the couch with a bucket of ice cream in your lap watching Netflix or something, and all is good with the world. Well, when you're in that space, you're probably not really primed to learn. You're comfortable, and you're just not that paying attention that closely. And then on the outside of the circle, the red zone, that's panic zone. That's when, red alert, everything's going crazy, you're highly stressed, like really in panic. That's also not a great place for learning to happen. Like you're in fight or flight, and you're not in a space where you can learn. But somewhere in the middle there is the learning zone, where your anxiety is raised a little bit, but in a manageable level. Maybe your heart rate's up, or you're just on high alert. It's in that space where learning really can happen. But it's also in that space where right now a lot of people, I won't keep it at students, but people aren't comfortable having that little bit of anxiety. They think it's not okay. And so really trying to normalize that little bit of anxiety is okay, and actually is something they should kind of lean into and embrace. During this pre-brief, we also, do some expectations around, letting them know how long the simulation experience is going to take. So you're going to be in the simulation for 20 minutes, and then we're going to pause. So if they know it's 20 minutes and they're starting to have a little anxiety, it maybe helps them to know, okay, this is only going to be 20 minutes. They're going to stop it at that point. We go over ground rules, and it's especially important when we're dealing with a simulation that is about inclusivity or equity. It's especially important to have ground rules, and I'll show those in a minute. And we also acknowledge, have students acknowledge their, how their lived experience might impact the way that they interpret the situation, the way they engage with the simulated patient. We talk about respecting differences. And then it's also really important to be very deliberate and clear that the facilitator of the experience is in the same boat. We need to do all those same things, and we need to model that for our students, that we are also keeping ourselves in check and trying to be reflective of how our biases are impacting things. And then again, we go over the very specifics of how long will the debrief be, and are we going to do 1 or 2 runs of this simulation? This is an example of the pre-brief for guidelines for cultural humility, and we will give this on this page and the next page, and these are from Ferranda, which is the author who created the framework that Krista described earlier. But we will share these guidelines with students maybe in a, put it on their learning management system. They give them a PDF of it so that they can read it ahead of time. But we will also read it aloud during the pre-brief, maybe having the students each read a different part of it, or maybe having them read it and highlight one of the guidelines that speaks to them. But it's really, again, about having them acknowledge that they're going to be aware of their personal values and beliefs and behaviors, that they will focus on the feelings of others and approach the experience with a flexible and humble attitude to engage in healthy, supportive interactions. We encourage them to think about embracing conflicting viewpoints with curiosity and giving them full consideration, supporting their peers, recognizing power differentials where they exist, really respecting others, and engaging in self-reflection. And once we've gone through that, then the pre-brief, we move into the actual discussion of the scenario. So students are given a piece of the case before they enter into this simulation. And so then we talk through it, and we have them describe, so nursing students, what did you think about this case? Tell me what you know about Mrs. Jones, as you're walking into today, and have each of the students from different disciplines kind of share their understanding of the case as they're entering into the room. When it's an interprofessional simulation, we'll talk about the goals for each of the different professions in the scenario, maybe talk about the scopes of practice, like what can one provider do versus another provider. And then we might address any of the concerns that the individual providers have about the patient care or the patient scenario. And then finally, the last thing after we've done that is we take the, during this point, we'll also identify which of the students are going to actually participate in the scenario, whether it's as the provider or maybe a family member. and which of the students are going to be observers. And the observers are all have roles, like they are paying attention and they're expected to be able to participate in the debrief. So regardless of the role that the students have, they have some expectations. And then following that, we actually take them into the simulation room and just orient them to the room, to any equipment that's there, to the mannequin, if there's a mannequin, to the simulated participant, if there's a simulated participant. So as Krista mentioned, we have some other videos we brought to share with you small snippets of an unfolding simulation that we've created around a fetal loss. And so we have 5 different videos that we're going to show you. And it begins with a pregnant mother coming in for a routine ultrasound. During that ultrasound, they are unable to find a fetal heartbeat. So then we move into another scenario where there is a handoff to the the physician assistant and a social worker. And then a third scenario where the team goes in to deliver the news to the mother. In our simulation, there's also a scene that's post-delivery. We didn't bring a video of that, but then there's a third scene that is a post-delivery home visit where a team of providers goes to visit the mother in her home following the delivery. And 2 videos on that are, there will be one where the team has a small brief, they're meeting each other and they're talking about what they're going to do when they go in to meet with the mother, and then the final scenario is the home visit. I'll set them all up again as we go, but that's just kind of an overview. So this first one here is a mother coming in for routine ultrasound.
Awesome. And how are you feeling today? You okay? Good, yeah. Do you think I could get some pictures today, maybe? Yeah, for sure. We'll talk to a doctor about that, and then we'll see you after. Good, thank you. Of course. How was the drive-in? I know, it was good. Yeah. Wasn't too bad, not too much traffic, so can't complain, right? Yeah. All right, and I'm gonna have you lift up your gown for you, and you have up with the sheet. Yeah. Awesome. Alrighty. I'm gonna take a few images, it should be only a few minutes, and then if you have any questions, I'll grab a doctor afterwards. Okay. It's a little warm, you feel any pain or pressure? Alrighty. Finish up with some of the images. I'm gonna go grab a doctor. Can I see a towel? I'm gonna grab a doctor if you have any questions for them, and then if you want to wipe off any of the jaw or something.
And what I should have set up there was, obviously that was an ultrasonography student and a nursing student in that simulation. In the second scenario, they're going to go out of the room, and those two students are going to talk to a physician assistant and a social work student. Oops.
So I have a patient in there. They came for a position check, and we found out there's no heartbeat. Okay. Could you come help me discuss with that and see his future plan?
Yeah. Let me check with the radiologist report and see what they said.
Awesome.
It looks like they found the same findings that you did. There's fetal demise, so there's no activity there. So I'll deliver the news. I have social work here, so we can give support and stuff. Okay. Did you double check or tell anything to the patient?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. Just said I'd come get you for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. And we can join you in there too.
Okay.
I don't know if you could see in that video that there was a faculty member standing in the doorway, carefully listening to what was happening. Okay, and so now now that team of students is going in to deliver the news to the mother.
Hi, Ari. Hi. Good morning. I'm Jessica. I'm
Do you want me to sit up?
If you want,
Okay, yeah.
This might be a better conversation to have. I've got the whole team here with me. I'm the OBPA student. Leah is our social worker. These are our sonographers. Unfortunately, I do have some bad news for you. What sonography found and what the radiologist confirmed is there's no heartbeat in your baby right now. So what that means is fetal demise is what we call it. And that means your baby is not alive right now. I know this is horrible news and not news any expecting mother wants to hear ever.
No, what are you saying?
What we see on our imaging, and we can double check, triple check.
Yeah, can you double check, triple
Absolutely.
check to make sure, right?
Absolutely.
No, I just felt her last night.
Okay.
She was kicking, she was fine,
Okay.
right?
What we see today at this visit is a lack of a heartbeat and lack of fetal movement.
What do you mean? So you actually know that she's not, what?
That is what the radiologist confirmed. We can double check it again real quick now. I know this is horrible news and a lot to take in.
I don't understand what you're saying, honestly. So you're saying that she's not even, what are you saying to me?
I'm saying she's no longer living.
What are you saying to me right now? What are you saying to me right now? What are you saying to me right now?
Your baby is no longer living.
But I came here, I just had my baby shower. I felt her last night. I swear I did. She was kicking, she was there.
And
That's always a rough one to watch. And so then the next scenario is post-delivery, a couple weeks post-delivery, and there is a team of nursing and social work students who are going to go do a home visit with this mother to check on her, and they are meeting outside the home, having a briefing to establish roles before they go into the home. And this video starts actually with the woman in the purple who's going to walk out of the room as the faculty members. So I didn't capture that piece in this video, but it's an example of the faculty member huddling with the students, kind of getting them prepared before she sends them off to do the simulation. So you'll see her leave, and then the students entering into their pre-visit brief.
Okay, Travis is ready. You guys are good to go. All right.
Okay, hi guys. So I'm Lauren, and this is Maddie. We're the nurses for this home visit. I think our biggest goals with this visit is kind of see how she's doing, check in on the lactation, just making sure that she's pumping and that she's feeling okay. And then probably a safety check, just make sure she's doing all right kind of around the house. So what are you kind of trying to get done?
Check in with her emotionally, see if she even remembers any of the conversations from delivery.
Yeah.
I do have resources with me.
Okay.
And can at least mention them, see if she is interested in discussing them now or wants to just leave them. So we'll play that part by ear. But I have some things to check in with her about emotionally and some resources for her too.
Okay. I think we should maybe see what her support system is like.
Yeah.
Sounded like from one of the notes that I read that her mom was supposed to be coming to stay with her. Maybe checking in with that, how her and her husband are coping, seeing how she's doing. I believe the nurses before told her about her lactation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much she maybe remembers because it was such a traumatic event. So that's definitely something that we kind of want to cover again.
Yeah.
See if she has equipment to pump, if that's something she wants to do, and then how she would kind of like to move forward.
Good. Yeah. And then let's make sure that she has her next appointment scheduled with the provider.
Yeah.
And Dad's not with us today, right? Did he go to work?
I think
I think he's at work.
I'm curious to know if Mom is hopefully still coming to town.
Yeah. All right. Should we head on in?
Yes.
We're ready. Okay.
So you can see in that part of the scenario, they really did a nice job of establishing roles and responsibilities and really aligning with a lot of those IPEC competencies. And now we're moving into the final video, and we're all going to breathe a huge sigh of relief when it works. And this is just a snippet of the home brief or the home visit that they have conducted. So this is much longer video. We're just taking a small portion of it.
If you want to.
How have things been going with your husband? Conversations?
I think, he's just having a hard time like me. He's so supportive of me. He's the best. I'm very lucky to have him, honestly. Yeah, he's sad. We're just sad. So.
Have you been able to be sad together?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, his mom has been really nice too, and his dad, and my mom has been helping a lot, and my sister too has been just amazing, so.
I'm glad to hear that you have such an amazing support system around you
I'm
right
very
now.
thankful for that. I really am. It's very, very thankful, so.
And another thing that we just want to check in with you is, are you taking care of yourself during this time too? Eating, drinking water, sleeping?
I have been showering. It's been really hard for some reason. Sleep, I don't know. But it's hard.
It's hard.
Here and there.
Yeah, here and
eating
there.
Eating some, showering some.
Yeah, but I know hopefully I don't know what's normal anymore, so.
And I think you have an appointment next week with your provider.
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Okay. We can write that down too to help remind you. It would just be good to go in there just so we can do a little checkup afterwards. It's only been a couple of days and it's still fresh, everything's still new for you, but it sounds like you're doing the best you can, and I think that's amazing. So we'll definitely want to see you at that appointment next week with the provider. And I'll write it down before we leave today.
Are you guys gonna be there?
We're the home nurse.
Okay.
So we'll be checking in with you. We have a couple more appointments after that.
And you will be the same people that will come back here? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. I know in the hospital and in the clinic it can sometimes change, but these home visits, they're pretty good about getting kind of your same team put together.
Yeah, if you can make that happen, I would really like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And
have you considered maybe meeting with some other moms in a support group at some point? Not today, not this week, but.
No, my husband had mentioned something like that, but I just don't know how to even find that.
Well, I can help you find that. There's a list of those in here. Some are virtual, some are in person, depending on whichever you prefer.
Okay.
And they, obviously virtual can be anywhere in the Twin Cities, but the in-person ones, they have them listed, per area. And most of them are free. And there are some that are just moms. There are some that are both parents. So lots of options there. And again, those are phone calls. Some do require reservations, so that they can maintain the space.
Okay.
But if there's any help that I can provide with calling places with you, calling places for you, sometimes right now it's kind of even difficult to dial a phone number. So we can do any of that together.
that might be a way to find community with other women and parents who have gone through something similar to you and just remind you that you're not alone.
Okay.
If you want to.
So you can see that that's a pretty complex scenario. Like I said, we left out one whole section that was in the hospital right immediately following delivery, but this simulation involved students from multiple programs, many students. It was a very complex simulation, and I guess just ask you to take a moment to think about what types of things would be important to consider in a pre-brief to make this type of scenario successful, and to think, looking at all of the different roles that the students had, like the importance, kind of highlighting the importance of just establishing those roles so students understand what they're about to do as they leave the pre-brief and going into this scenario. And I guess just bottom line, we just can't stress enough that pre-briefing really sets the stage for success for the activity, hopefully makes it psychologically safe for the students, and puts them in a place where they really can learn. And I'm going to turn it over now to Krista to talk about the debriefing. So thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to the fetal loss, just to give you a number, there were 100 different students who were participating. Because each of the programs, we needed to be inclusive of the students from each of the programs, the nursing program, the social work program, the physician assistant, and the sonography program. And that's a lot of students to have in one space. And so to set the stage, we had to be very intentional. But we also needed to ensure that the students understood. So the students who participated volunteered. They knew what the subject was ahead of time. So they had preparation. And we did have spiritual care available so that there was somebody that they could talk to if they needed it. So we also had to think about everybody's well-being during the scenario. And because the students, they were being observed by others in an auditorium, the observers had roles and they needed to think about what they were seeing, but we did not actually debrief the students in a room of 100 because we couldn't facilitate a really rich discussion and be inclusive of all. So we debriefed them in a separate room, and the observers observed the debrief, and then they electronically typed questions and thoughts that were then shared into that smaller debrief. And I just wanted to share those aspects, because when you're thinking about numbers of students, like how can you do a sim for 100, 115 students, you get creative. You think not only inside the box, we need to think about what are our resources inside the box, we also think outside the box to address and make sure that we're meeting those needs. And so that kind of leads us to the debriefing aspect for any type of simulation. There is a standards of best practice around debriefing. And once again, a debrief is intended, it should be planned, and it is intended to guide the learners through the experience. I always think about it as we are a guide on the side, not the stage on the stage. So this is not a comfortable space being up here on the stage, because I like to be the guide by the side. But that we are also ensuring that it is facilitated by somebody who is skilled and competent in providing feedback. We need to be able to provide that feedback in a way that is supportive, debrief and do a guided reflection of that experience, and that it's conducted in a manner that really promotes self, team, and a system analysis. So, and for IPE, we really are thinking about those team dynamics and that team communication and how we can work together and communicate better, whether it's written, verbal, or other formats, to ensure that we're optimizing the care of patients. And then that it's planned and structured in a purposeful way and has that theoretical framework. So as we think about debriefing, You know, it is a reflection on our actions. Our goal is to identify performance gaps, discuss areas of improvement, and consider knowledge and skills that can be applied later on in practice, really to improve patient or client outcomes. And that is a quote from Chang et al. About what debriefing is. And we're going to dig in a little deeper into it, but debriefing can be really transformative. Oftentimes in simulation, they say the learning happens in the debrief. And I always think about, we've all had those days in which we were working, and you go home and you think, did I do this? Did I do that? Could I have done this a little better? Like, that is that reflective self-debrief that we are doing in that process. And the idea of a debrief is really to provide a structure to help students walk through that process, but then learn with, from, and about each other, and recognizing that everybody is bringing an expertise or a different perspective to that conversation. And so every debrief really should have a structure. There are many, many debriefing models that are out there, but they all have a basic structure. So we're just going to discuss the foundational structure of a debrief, which is a beginning, which is a reactionary phase. And then a middle, which is that analysis and reflective phase. And that really is grounded in those objectives. So during that analysis, we're really trying to meet those objectives. And then there's the summary phase where we wrap it up. However, sometimes we run out of time. I'll just share. It's okay to state your objectives in the summary phase as well as add some additional information. But more than anything, it's a dialogue in which the learners really should be speaking more than the facilitators. And that the dialogue is to discuss the actions and thought processes of a specific situation, encourage reflection and consider alternatives. There's not one right way all the time. We all have different approaches, so especially when we're thinking about interprofessional interactions, that we have an opportunity to learn how somebody else says that, how another person maybe delivers that news. Because I thought the delivery, boy, how do you tell somebody that their baby, you know, it's a fetus, but still their baby doesn't have a heartbeat. Like that just, I don't know if I could find my words for that. And so how does somebody else say that? And then have a conversation around that. Discuss the interactions between those team members. We saw that in the pre-brief, or in the briefing that happened and the handoffs. How can we, where is everybody's scope of practice, and how can we lean on each other in a real life situation? So that debrief gives us more tools that our students can walk away from. So in the next situation, they will feel more prepared. And then to incorporate, you know, all of that for the improvement for the future. So we're going to walk through these phases. The initial is really initial reactions. Everybody walks out of a scenario. Some feel like, I got it, that was great. Others like, boy, that was challenging. All right, I didn't do anything right. And usually they did do something right. I should have said this, I should have done that. And then, so it's helpful in this reactionary phase for those who participated to initially express their reactions, but then also using those observers to share what went well, and also for the team members who participated. Like, I really liked it actually when you said that. I felt supported in the scenario when you said that. I appreciated how you came around and rubbed the back of the patient and offered that comfort. I wasn't comfortable doing that, and I wasn't sure if that was appropriate. And so this is an opportunity to then also start to write down kind of that parking lot of those ideas that we want to make sure that we also pull in during that analysis phase. So when we think about the debriefing analysis, this is an image from Jennifer Rudolph. It's been around since 2007, so it's longstanding. But it talks about how we often look at actions and then look at the results. And then we go back to talk about what are the actions that people took. When really, it's like Sherlock Holmes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sherlock Holmes, but a detective And you need to use the visible and invisible clues. You want to uncover what's happening behind the scenes, because we're making an assumption based on what we observed. But we really need to understand it from the participant's perspective. So our goal is to get to the frame. And we do this in a reflective manner during that debriefing analysis phase. I often say it's best to start this analysis phase by debriefing from the beginning of the scenario. Before you entered into the scenario, what conversations happened? What were you anticipating? What were you concerned about? After you entered into the scene, like in here, the ultrasound. As you entered into the scene and you introduced yourself, how was the patient? What were you thinking? What happened when you didn't hear a heartbeat? And then I think, did the patient hear the heartbeat? We often hear that ultrasound machine. And what were they thinking? And so you start in the beginning and you reflectively walk through that scenario so that you ensure that you talk about and address all of the objectives. Ensuring that we're using open-ended questions and to ensure that it's based on our observations. I noticed, I'm not going to refer to the fetal loss scenario for this one, because I think in terms of, I noticed maybe that you put on a patient who was very short of breath and their oxygen sats were 85%, I noticed you put a 2-liter nasal cannula on that. Tell me more. What were you thinking? Because it could be, I couldn't find the equipment and I knew some oxygen was better than nothing and they had COPD. So I was concerned, or congestive obstructive pulmonary disease. I was concerned that maybe I didn't want to put them on too much oxygen. Now we understand the framework of where that learner is coming from. Okay, first of all, they couldn't find the equipment. That is big. They were concerned about the patient's history and how that might impact what O2 sats, oxygen saturations, are good for that patient. Or you could say, I heard that you gave resources in the fetal loss in the home environment. You provided resources on a community of moms who've lost their loved ones, their infants. Tell me more about how you feel, or tell me what you were thinking about when you provided that. And so you talk about what you heard. But it's very objective to learn more about what that was for those who were participating. And I think it's really valuable to always extend the invitation to share more. Does anybody else have another idea? Are there any other strategies that maybe somebody else would have used? And then while we're talking about this, that's where it's also really valuable to begin in an interprofessional simulation from the sonography perspective. You were viewing the scenario, but this is not a scenario that you would maybe partake in. What were some of your thoughts, and how can you better prepare for the future? Or have a better understanding of what that experience will be for that mom? Or for the physician assistant, can you share kind of your thoughts as well? So extending that invitation is really important. So some examples of IPE objectives, because we're going to talk about the importance of addressing these objectives, is maybe demonstrating effective communication. And how did they meet that families? This is actually from the fetal loss scenario, so I'm going to read them specifically. Demonstrate effective communication skills with colleagues and team members from other professionals and with the patient, clients, and family. So that was one of the IPE objectives. Understand the roles and value added by interdisciplinary team members when engaging in holistic patient-centered care in emotionally, medically, and spiritually complex scenarios. So as we think about this, during this analysis phase, we want to address these IPE objectives. So these are some potential questions that we could use to get to these. How did team members know the roles of others when they entered the room? So that's why we did that pre-brief. That gives them an opportunity, but then that brief, they could discuss what they saw in, or what they shared in the brief, and then you could reach out to others. Which members were in charge? Because we do recognize there's power differentials sometimes, and how were orders communicated? Situational awareness is knowing what's happening around you, so you can intervene as necessary. As we looked at the home, what were some observations that were made? And then mutual support, providing assistance to a team member who might need it. Are there examples where someone during the scenario engaged? Sorry, I don't want to turn around. But engaged in situational awareness and mutual support. And then we also have mutual understanding. How it occurs when we're all on the same page. How do we create that shared mental model? What was the approach? What were our next steps? What was the responsibility of each team member? Did we know our roles? And how can we take this learning experience and move it forward to the next patient? Were there intersections of similar goals between the health professionals? And how did team communication with the patient in terms of the patient were appropriate? And were there opportunities? Was there a health literacy concern? I think about a sim that we did interprofessionally with occupational therapy and dietetic and nutrition. And they learned in the scenario that occupational therapy and dietetics had a similar goal in how they could do their assessments together and actually get more information to optimize their care. But it took kind of walking through that process and doing that introduction and that engagement and having that discussion that when the simulation was repeated, the dietetic student invited the occupational therapist into the room, and let's talk about the social driver, the concern that the patient didn't have money for the appropriate diabetic diet or their medications. And so what were the next steps? So you walk through this process. But then it's also in an IPE simulation, you want to ensure that you have objectives that are specific for that particular healthcare discipline. So this is an example from the fetal loss scenario, how we identified what the objectives were. What was interesting about the fetal loss scenario is I told you there was so many students, and they had quite a few objectives that they wanted to address as well. So we did the debrief together where it was projected, focused on interprofessional education objectives, and then the students separated into their different rooms to talk about their discipline. So they debriefed to reach their discipline-specific objectives. And that way you could get smaller groups, and they could begin to take what they learned from the IPE debrief and pull it in to their discipline specific. So we can get creative. So the debriefing analysis, we actually want to understand the frames and the framework of those who participated for them so that we can maybe provide them some information, or we can get new ideas and strategies so that we can now help them maybe correct some actions and have some meaning behind that that will lead to different results in the future. So as we think about strategies in the summary, in the debriefing summary, we can talk about strategies that are questions about takeaways. So like following this session today, what are your takeaways? We will love to hear those from you. You could share the objectives. The objective of this learning was for all of you to have a better understanding of how you can design and plan, implement an interprofessional simulation. Share the purpose, but it's really important in an IPE sim that you share a summary of what the benefits of our collaboration. So as we close up, what were your values, or what did you find important about doing an interprofessional learning event? And that it becomes valuable for them to kind of internalize that meaning of value for teamwork. So then I ask you, what do you see in this image? And just take a moment. Who sees a lion? I see some hands. Okay, who sees a monkey? More hands go up. I also think there could be a little froggy down at the bottom, kind of upside down. All right, I'm going to see if this works. But here is the little tiger, the ear, the eye. Here's the monkey hanging. Here's maybe a tadpole. Some people see a face in here with a little nose, chin. Some people see a bird. And the point is we can be all looking at the same exact thing, image, scene, scenario, and have a different understanding of what happened. So it's really important in that debriefing experience that we bring it together to recognize that we all have a unique perspective, but we need to ensure that we are addressing the frames and making any corrections, because we want our graduates to leave here feeling prepared, knowing best practices in healthcare. So remember in your debrief, base your conversation on objective observations. Seek to understand first, remain curious, explore performance, identify gaps, and I say use silence. Each of us processes information at a different speed, and it might take another person some time to organize their thoughts. I have a colleague, she always grabs her water bottle and she takes a sip and counts to 10, just to give some time for individuals and to create a space where everybody has that voice. And then ensure that you are providing direct feedback if there is that elephant in the room where something really didn't occur as it should, that we do address that during that, in that debrief, so that we can correct incorrect actions. And then in summary, IPE simulation requires a focus on interprofessional competencies in addition to discipline-specific competencies. The IPE simulations should involve disciplines during the planning stage and also in the facilitation, that all disciplines should be present and involved, and that we're hearing the voices and perspectives, and that we are using standards of best practice. So as we close up here, take a moment to consider what are strategies that you will implement and who can you collaborate with? This is our time for questions and comments. We know we have an online audience as well, so we want to open that up to share those questions. Give us a moment to put our headsets on, and I think there's some microphones that will be passed around.
Bien, muchas gracias Krista y Ruini, muy interesante esta secuencia de la cual nos fueron comentando cómo fueron incorporando esta estrategia en su experiencia dentro de su institución. Sin duda para nosotros esto es lo que ya hemos empezado a trabajar, y estos ingredientes que nos están entregando, aquí hay muchos académicos que están trabajando en los comités de diseño interprofesional, y lógicamente esto nos da fuerzas para que el camino que estamos llevando vamos bien encaminadas, gracias al apoyo de ustedes y a las orientaciones que nos han entregado. Desde las sedes hay varios conectados y tenemos preguntas. Los que tengan preguntas acá en nuestra audiencia, Paula va a estar con el micrófono para poder, si quieren, mientras levantan su mano, y yo voy a hacer la pregunta que tenemos desde las sedes del sur, que están conectados y ya nos han mandado algunas preguntas que quieren hacerles a ustedes en relación a su presentación. La primera de ellas que voy a partir comentando. ¿Cuáles fueron, desde su experiencia, el mayor desafío o resistencia al realizar estas simulaciones interprofesionales en su institución? Los inalámbricos.
Does that work? Oh, it does. Okay. I think the biggest challenges that a lot of people, a lot of the different programs initially thought was that it was going to be hard to logistically find the time and the space in order to come together. And we learned through the process of coming together and just sharing ideas and discussing the value as a team. There were many points in which there were similar time points in a semester, so we didn't bring five programs together at once. Maybe we started with 2. We started with occupational therapy and nursing. They needed to replace clinicals during the pandemic. They needed to. And they both have an accreditation that supports replacing, using simulation to replace clinicals. And so that was one of the first low-hanging fruit. What we did learn from that is, interestingly, the students didn't understand why they were together until the 3rd simulation. Then they went, aha, I get it. So that's where we learned how important it is to really frame this up ahead of time. But I think it's the logistics of it. We are also looking right now in mapping where certain content falls in each of the curriculums via surveys, and we're mapping it out, and we're scheduling it a year in advance so that they can include it as part of their curriculum to meet a student outcome. So we're being very intentional in our design.
I agree, and I would add that one barrier that I think is there's a commitment to working on resolving, but one barrier is just the thought that our curriculum is already filled. Like, we have to deliver so much content and we only have X amount of time, and the simulation is an extra thing. And I think we're getting to the place where programs are recognizing that the simulation doesn't have to be an extra thing, but maybe it replaces something, that it actually does it in a better way sometimes even. So that's been another barrier that we're still working through, but we're getting there.
I would add, I think another concern is faculty load. We are already doing so much and you're asking us to do more. And so by creating the institute, we can take that off of your plate and now your voice informs it, but there is a team to do that work. And so framing that up has been a conversation that we've had in many different places and shared in different voices to really help communicate that to the team members. And as they participate, I like it. I can see this.
Yeah, there's no shortage of barriers, that's for sure. I think accreditation can be one helpful facilitator if we can remind them that their accreditors are expecting that they do interprofessional activities, and simulation is a great way to demonstrate that their students are meeting competencies for their accreditation status.
Ok. Bien. Qué interesante respuesta. No sé si muchos nos sentimos muy reconocidos con aquellas fuerzas restrictivas, ¿cierto?, que están apareciendo, cargas académicas, dónde lo colocamos en el plan de estudio. Y efectivamente compartimos con ustedes quizás los mismos dolores que iniciaron y las fortalezas, obviamente, que fueron apareciendo. ¿Tenemos alguna pregunta de acá de sede Santiago? ¿Por allá? Vamos por una pregunta de acá
Hola.
de Santiago.
¿Se escucha? Sí.
Sí.
Una de las cosas que hemos visto nosotros es el gran aporte del feedback o el debriefing, la participación de los actores, de los mismos actores, cuando hacemos con actores vivos, no con simuladores. ¿Cómo han logrado ustedes obtener una masiva cantidad, según la cantidad de actividades de simulación, de actores que realmente actúen bien y que puedan aportar con su debriefing hacia los asistentes?
This is Krista's.
So since starting in 2020, we created a volunteer standardized or simulated participant program, and we started with reaching to our alums. Oftentimes our alums want to come back or give back, but maybe financially they're not at a point, but they can contribute by being in the patient role. And so we started with, we have a pool of about 100 volunteers that come to be our simulated participants, and we ensure that there is a training. They all are onboarded with a video explaining what simulation is. They sign a confidentiality consent, and then with each scenario, there is a script that is created for the simulated participant that kind of walks through the unfolding of the case and how they might cue. But we also give some latitude to improv as long as they stay in the personality and character to meet the objectives. So we share that with them. But we do a virtual training session, or depending if they're returning to the same simulation, because many of them like, I want to come back and do that. But it's scheduled for an hour of a virtual training. And if we're doing multiple sims where we have multiple actors doing the same scenario, we'll bring them together as a group. It's been very, very valuable because they're bringing maybe non-healthcare perspectives, because we're starting to get community members who are just interested, and they're sharing their experiences in healthcare and what seems realistic based on maybe their family member or what their experience was. So they are informing our scripts to help them be more realistic, because sometimes we look at things from an expert healthcare eye and not from the individual who's maybe has some health literacy, or somebody who can't hear as well or can't see as well. And so it's helped us really enrich our scenarios. And then we invite them to be part of that debriefing, and in that training, we talk to them about how the debriefing will unfold and what will reach out to them to participate. And we really want them to share from that patient experience, and that we do this in a very supportive way, and we give examples. So that's how we've involved, and they walk away learning more about their healthcare so they can advocate for themselves and for their loved ones. And they feel much more confident in the healthcare system, knowing that we're graduating individuals who are really reflectively thinking through their actions in that debrief, and they're amazed. And so they have more confidence in the healthcare system they're walking into now.
Uh-huh. Ok, gracias. ¿Por allá?
Ok.
¿Tu nombre y si nombras tu nombre y quién
Jenny
eres?
Forero, soy educadora de simulación de acá de la sede de Santiago de los Leones, y quisiera preguntar cuál es su experiencia en escenarios con temática ética, si se ha aplicado y qué nos sugieren frente al desarrollo de estos escenarios.
So if you think about it, the fetal demise or the fetal loss scenario had some ethical considerations, or definitely cultural considerations that were embedded into the debriefing discussion that we had. but we also include ethical, like we might include an ethical statement in a debrief. So thinking and provide an alternative. What if this happened? What would you do? And what are your resources? When I think about ethics, I think about a personal experience that I had and how I did not know that there was an ethics committee or an ethics team I could reach out to, and how as a result a patient passed away, and how I live with that. More because I was like fired from the bedside because I was advocating for the patient. And it was, so my goal, or our goal at St. Kate's, is to actually embed a co-curricular ethical dilemma into a simulation. So we haven't done it yet, but we do include the questions in the debrief so we can reflect back on what we would do. Because our graduates need to know that there are those resources. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. I would say we have didactic interprofessional education courses at St. Kate's, and there are some ethical case studies that the students will work through together as interprofessional teams, but they would be lower level, like on that continuum I talked about. They might be more of a team type experience because it would be a paper case where they would be talking through a scenario. But those definitely align with the values and ethics portion of the interprofessional education competencies. But I think we do need to continue to build out our simulation experiences in that area. And I know we have a lot of social work faculty who would love that. Yes.
Ok, muchas gracias. Tenemos acá otra pregunta. ¿Tu nombre, institución?
Hola, mi nombre es Marianela Araya, soy también educadora de simulación de aquí de la sede y mi pregunta está orientada a si tienen programado o ya han explorado evaluar la apreciación de los empleadores, de las personas que estudian con ustedes después de haber tenido estas experiencias IP. Gracias.
So in each of our programs, I'll have to just preface that when I started in 2020, many programs weren't doing SIM that are now doing SIM. So as we do discipline-specific simulation scenarios, one of the things that currently is happening is that they're using simulation to help prepare for clinicals or fieldwork experiences, and they're already evaluating or asking the preceptors to evaluate their students. So we're doing it from before clinical and after clinical experience. We haven't moved out to now post-graduation, but we do know that, or we've talked to many of our programs because they do have advising councils that include their hiring entities on their advisory councils, and they're saying they're seeing a difference, but we haven't formalized how to collect that data, and it is one of the things that we're brainstorming about because there's so many different programs and so many different clinical partners, and how do we evaluate? So we have to see, like, what are we doing now, and what can we add, and ensuring that it's addressing it for all 28 programs, because that's a lot of programs that we have.
We do have some post-grad surveys that we administer because many of our creditors require that. We're tracking where our students go and where they're working. But I don't know that we've connected it with simulation experiences.
And it's asking the students to report, right?
I think there's some where they are actually also talking with employers, but yeah, we're not. So yes, we're not doing that. More to do in that area.
Ok. Bien, tenemos muchas preguntas. Vamos a ir por la última pregunta de las sedes. Esta es de la sede Valdivia. A propósito del escenario que estaba relacionado a la pérdida fetal, mencionaron algo del cuidado espiritual. y quieren preguntar cómo aseguran el cuidado espiritual de los estudiantes, cómo abordan ese concepto.
We used to have a spiritual care program that unfortunately has been sunset, so it's made addressing that a little more difficult perhaps, but we do have, I think our social work students have some training in that area, and also our holistic nurse, we have holistic health or holistic nursing frameworks that our students are taught. So it's probably not from a religious approach, but more of a whole person and considering the spirituality of the patient and the individual rather than providing spiritual direction, just ensuring that our students are addressing that component of the whole patient's being. I don't know if that makes sense. Is that getting at it?
Yeah, and then we also ensured that we had a chaplain who was available. So during the fetal demise, if anybody felt like they needed to talk to somebody, that there was a chaplain there that they could discuss it with. We have also notified the mental health services on campus. So if anything is triggering for a student that they might see a student reach out, and we've shared those resources with students to know that there are mental health support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and what those numbers are. We actually have a little badge that has all that information for our students that we give out ahead of time. So we let the mental health department also know when we're doing simulations that might cause a triggering emotion in them. It might bring them back to a lived experience that they've had, so that they have someone to talk to.
Ok, bien. Tenemos muchísimas preguntas. Todas las preguntas que tenemos se las vamos a hacer llegar para que luego las respondemos de otro modo escritas y las vamos a compartir. Así que los que tengan preguntas aquí en la audiencia las hacen llegar y respondemos a aquellas preguntas. Bueno, para terminar, pensando que estamos ya en el tiempo, quisiéramos estar compartiendo mucho más rato con ustedes, expresar mi más sincero reconocimiento y agradecimiento a ambas por haber aceptado nuestra invitación y haber compartido con nosotros su experiencia, cómo ha sido su caminar en relación a esto de la interprofesionalidad, que en nuestro país lo estamos recién como puliendo un poquito más y creo que esta instancia nos ayuda, pensando que estamos con universidades amigas, directivos y académicos, la instancia para poder ya tener más fuerza y llevarlo a cabo de la mejor manera posible. Quiero invitar a nuestro director general de simulación y a nuestro director de campos clínicos, Andrés Díaz y Sergio Torres. Les tenemos unos presentes para ustedes, así es que muchas gracias por haber estado con nosotros. Muchas gracias. Un aplauso, ¿no? Sí. Muchas gracias, ¿estamos? Sí, muy bien. Gracias por los regalos, ¿sí? Bueno, y para terminar, Paula les va a compartir un QR para poder evaluar cómo fue esta experiencia. Tenemos todos sus contactos. Esta venida acá va a ser certificada, así que les vamos a hacer llegar digitalmente sus certificaciones. Muchas gracias por haber permanecido el día de hoy con nosotros. Nuestras invitadas van a estar por acá un ratito más, así que quienes quieran acercarse, por favor háganlo y muchas gracias y vendrán mejores instancias y muchas instancias en relación a este tema. Gracias a todos por venir.
Thank you so much.